What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and the other day I reviewed this Netflix's original movie, The Sea Beast, which was a lot of fun, but something I didn't get to do in that video because it honestly got too long was compare it to the obvious comparison, How to Train Your Dragon. Both are very similar movies. We'll get into it in a second, but I do want to give an obligatory spoiler warning for The Sea Beast and How to Train Your Dragon, and that includes 1, 2, and 3. So if you haven't seen any of the How to Train Your Dragons, get out now while you have a chance. But spoiler warning over. Spoilers for both of these movies moving forward. Okay, so these movies are incredibly similar. I mean, you got in The Sea Beast, it's pirates and sea monsters. In How to Train Your Dragons, it's Vikings and dragons. And to be fair, Vikings were maritime raiders. They were essentially pirates. They just get a different name. So there's that. Also interesting, both pirates and Vikings have been sensationalized in pop culture over the years, for better and for worse. So that's kind of fun. Also, both movies follow very similar plots. You know, the main society is fighting the supernatural creatures, and then they learn through an outcast or outcasts that they are wrong and that these creatures are intelligent and we shouldn't be killing them and stuff. Also, at the heart of both movies is a complex father-son relationship. In How to Train Your Dragon, it's Hiccup and Stoic. In The Sea Beast, it's more of a surrogate thing with Captain Crow and Jacob. And ultimately, both Maisie and Hiccup are determined to change society. They aren't comfortable just sitting by and letting this war continue between the two groups of people. However, here is where the differences begin to appear. One of the big things is that Hiccup is unsuccessful in changing society when he tries to do it at first. You remember this scene where he's fighting the Nightmare, and I say fighting in quotes here because obviously he lays down his weapons and his helmet right away, and he successfully calms the Nightmare, to be fair, but Hiccup's dad intervenes and it causes a whole problem. And he is unsuccessful at first. However, in The Sea Beast, Maisie gives her speech at the very end of the movie, and she is successful. Now, obviously, these movies are plotted very differently, such that Maisie's empowered speech happens at the very end of the movie, whereas Hiccup's kind of happens towards the end of the second act. So, yeah, that's fair. That's valid. But it is interesting that How to Train Your Dragon knew that the speech alone couldn't change society, and they made a change in that way. So now, to be fair to these differences, that makes it sound like How to Train Your Dragon is better, and I do think How to Train Your Dragon is a better movie, but I do want to acknowledge that, you know, when Maisie makes her big speech, it is really powerful and it is well done, especially since she has a beast there that she's standing on top of, Red, who isn't harming humans currently and is about to leave peacefully. And so the people very much have very real proof in their eyes that this isn't a problem. Hiccup's dad, on the other hand, did not allow that proof to be shown to the village. He stopped the fight before Hiccup had a chance to actually touch the Nightmare and prove to the group that things change. So there are some key differences in those scenes that doesn't really make The Sea Beast worse or better than How to Train Your Dragon, at least based off of that scene alone. It is just something interesting to note as a difference. However, what I think these scenes do show is that The Sea Beast ends on a very anticlimactic, low action thing. They're in a bay and they have a conversation. Yes, Jacob and Captain Crow fight a bit, and yes, the Sea Beast knocks over a few buildings. Okay, sorry, her name is Red. Red knocks over a few buildings, but there isn't really a whole lot going on, and that's how the movie ends, and it's very unsatisfying. I talked about that in my review. Whereas in How to Train Your Dragon, the speech Hiccup tries to give is only the end of the second act. There's a whole third act in which we get to have this big, awesome action fight scene where they fight the Red Death. And if you don't know, that big dragon at the end, the mother of all dragons, you could say, is called the Red Death. And Hiccup and Toothless get to fight it, and it's very exciting. I think that scene really elevates How to Train Your Dragon, really makes it a much better movie on its own and as compared to The Sea Beast. And that's really important and something that The Sea Beast is distinctly lacking. Now, I'm not saying that the Sea Beast should completely overhaul its plot and throw in a Red Death type character or type monster where all the beasts are subservient to that. No, I think the Sea Beast is better where all the monsters kind of can think for themselves, can choose for themselves. The movie purports that all of the sea monsters are nice and kind, which I don't think is true, but that's beside the point. However, I do think there's an opportunity where you could have had like a monster that's jaded by the war that needs to be put down. And that could have been more interesting, you know, if you kind of had a plot between two monsters and if they were able to communicate to the audience without them actually speaking, that one monster was not willing to let go of its grudge, whereas Red was willing to let go of her grudge and stuff. I don't know exactly how it would have worked. It would have been complicated, but we'll talk about some of the alternatives later on in the video. For now, one of the other big differences I want to make about the difference between the Sea Beast and the ending of How to Train Your Dragon 1 is the resolution. At the end of the Sea Beast, sea monsters and humans decide to part ways and to not interact with each other, which I think is horrible. I think segregation is not successful, and I think they should have chosen to learn how to coexist, especially since Jacob and Maisie just created this friendship and bond with Red, and now they never see their friend again. Like, imagine if Hiccup gave up on Toothless and was like, yeah, I'll never see you again, and stuff. At the end of How to Train Your Dragon 1, instead, the dragons come to live on Berk, and they learn to coexist. Yes, there's some changes that need to happen. Yes, there's some growing pains and whatnot, but we find out in How to Train Your Dragon 2 that a successful, happy society has been found between the two species, which I think is really, really cool and really, really good. Unfortunately, at the end of How to Train Your Dragon 3, they did decide to segregate. They said, oh, dragons, go live in the secret world because we humans, we aren't good enough for you and stuff, which is just such a disappointing and frustrating ending. I really hate the ending of How to Train Your Dragon 3. But, you know, it's so disappointing in How to Train Your Dragon 3, and for good reason, and that same disappointment is the disappointment I feel about the end of The Sea Beast. Both good movies, but just frustrating, you know? And this leads me to the animation differences between the two movies, because I talked about in my review of The Sea Beast that it was really frustrating and jarring how different the detail and animation was for the humans and the sea monsters. You know, the humans were incredibly well detailed, including their ships, whereas the sea monsters were incredibly simply detailed and very cartoonish almost and stuff. And How to Train Your Dragon doesn't really have this issue. I feel like the humans are much more simply animated as compared to the Sea Beast, while the dragons themselves are much more detailed compared to the Sea Beast and stuff. So it is confusing and weird. I kind of made this graph to kind of show what I'm thinking and talking about. Like, I do still think the humans in How to Train Your Dragon are probably more detailed than the dragons themselves, but doesn't really matter. The point is, I think it's not as jarring to see Hiccup interact with Toothless as it is for you to see Jacob and Maisie interact with Red. And that's kind of, it's not a big thing, but it does add up to one of the many reasons why I think How to Train Your Dragon is better. So, with all of those differences explained, ultimately, if it wasn't clear enough already, How to Train Your Dragon is the better movie, in my opinion. I still think The Sea Beast is a great film, but I think How to Train Your Dragon is just a masterpiece from start to finish. And I think the big thing with How to Train Your Dragon is that it nails the ending. It sticks that landing so well as compared to The Sea Beast. Now, I'm not saying that Sea Beast is a terrible movie or that you shouldn't watch it, because there is a masterpiece out here. Watch both. They're both great films. I love pirates. I love Vikings. I love dragons. I love sea monsters. They're all great. They're all fun. You can enjoy both movies. I'm grateful that I live in the modern era where I have both of these movies to go to enjoy seeing this kind of film, you know? It's just acknowledge that I think The Sea Beast is a weaker film compared to How to Train Your Dragon, and I think there are a few things they could have done to make it a better film. I mean, first and foremost, like, don't change anything about the movie. Just change the epilogue at the end and say, yeah, from that day forward, humans explored the seas alongside sea beasts, and they learned to benefit each other and help each other. That's all you had to do. Show Jacob and Maisie on the Inevitable with the rest of the crew, and Red flanking their side as they go out as they ride off into the sunrise. That is 10 times better than Jacob and Maisie ending up on a farm away from Red, away from the sea, and them telling us that, the hunters are no more, and we don't know what the rest of the crew is doing or anything. Like, that's just such a better movie and stuff. And I'm just kind of sad that they didn't do that and stuff. And that would fix like one of the biggest problems I have with the Sea Beast. In terms of the other big problem of them not having a beast to fight at the end, I think you'd have to change the plot significantly to like build up another creature, maybe that purple crab, maybe Red's twin brother, I don't know, twin sister, who cares, but you'd have to build up another sea monster that is jaded by the humans, that isn't willing to stop against the humans, and have that creature kind of come back, and then you could have Red fighting that creature, but she isn't strong enough, so the hunters have to use their skills to beat the creature, and then they stop monster hunting now that this monster is gone and done and stuff. And heck, I think this could be an opportunity to bring back that witch Gwen, which she is slightly more of a witch than my review showed, because I do remember now that Captain Crow's little tattoo moved around his neck all creepy like, and that definitely was not anything possible in our world. That is magic. So there's that, but doesn't really matter. But the point is, this character Gwen, she could have been controlling a beast somehow, and they could have had to kill that beast. I don't know. That could have kind of worked. Again, it would have been humans being the problem. But maybe like she loses control of the beast, and then the beast like is not willing to stop. The only way to stop it is to kill it. I don't know. There's options that the Sea Beast could have gone down, but they didn't. And that's okay. It's still a good movie. It's just not a masterpiece in the same way that I think How to Train Your Dragon is a masterpiece. And so ultimately, that's what I want to end on, is that both these movies are good. Like, Versus is interesting to compare and contrast, but let's acknowledge that it's not How to Train Your Dragon's amazing and never watch The Sea Beast. The Sea Beast is a fantastic movie. I love watching that film. Despite its flaws, it's just never going to be as good as How to Train Your Dragon. And that's okay, because honestly, How to Train Your Dragon is a masterpiece. And if you're trying to make a masterpiece on every single movie, or to enjoy only masterpiece movies, well, you're going to have a very limited number of movies that you're going to be able to watch and enjoy. And I think it's okay to watch flawed movies. It's okay to enjoy flawed movies, and that's what you should do and stuff. I made this video in part because I wanted to share that message of it's okay to enjoy a flawed movie. And that's how I want to end. See you next time.